The cold, polished marble of the West Point Military Academy's Valor Hall reflected everything with brutal clarity. It reflected the morning light slanting through the towering arched windows, the gilded frames of portraits of stern, decorated generals, and the smug, self-assured faces of the young cadets who strode its length as if they already owned the world. It also reflected Helena Kovac, a woman who had become as much a fixture as the stone itself, and just as invisible. Dressed in a simple gray janitorial jumpsuit, her hair streaked with silver and pulled back in a severe bun, she moved with a quiet efficiency that was often mistaken for subservience. Her hands, though wrinkled, were steady as she polished the glass case containing the Academy's most sacred relic, a battle-worn flag from a forgotten conflict. She was a ghost in the machine of greatness, a silent witness to the forging of future leaders, and to them, she was less than nothing. Cadet Dalton, his uniform crisp enough to cut glass and his jaw set with the arrogance of inherited privilege, swaggered to a halt with his two acolytes, Cadets Pierce and Monroe. They watched Helena for a moment, a cruel amusement playing on their lips. They saw a stooped, tired old woman, a relic of a bygone era they couldn't even imagine. They saw a washed-up life. "Careful there, Helena," Dalton's voice cut through, the reverent silence of the hall dripping with condescension. "That glass protects the memory of real heroes. Wouldn't want your smudges to tarnish it." Pierce snickered, a sharp, unpleasant sound that echoed off the marble. Helena didn't look up. She simply continued her methodical, circular polishing, her face a mask of placid neutrality. This was her armor. Her silence. In the face of their daily barbs, their casual cruelty, it was the only defense she allowed herself. Her lack of reaction only goaded them further. "I wonder if she even knows what any of this means," Monroe mused, gesturing vaguely to the medals and citations lining the walls. "Sacrifice, honor, courage. It's probably just a list of things to dust for her." Dalton stepped closer, leaning against the case and peering down at her. "Tell us, Helena, what does valor mean to you? Is it getting a stubborn stain off the floor? Is it making sure? The brass is shiny for the Commandant's inspection." Helena's hand paused for a fraction of a second. A flicker of something ancient and weary passed through her eyes, a shadow of a storm so vast and violent that these boys, with their clean uniforms and unlined faces, could never comprehend its scale. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She resumed her polishing, the soft squeak of the cloth against glass the only reply. Her silence was a vacuum, and Dalton, ever the performer, needed to fill it with the sound of his own importance. He scoffed, turning to his friends. "See? Nothing. A blank slate, just part of the furniture. Come on, gentlemen. We have training. We have to prepare to actually be heroes, not just clean up after them." As they walked away, their laughter trailing. Behind them, Helena finally stopped. She looked up, not at their retreating backs, but at her own faint reflection in the glass. The face that stared back was a stranger to the woman she had once been. Behind the tired eyes and the lines etched by time and sorrow, there was a fortress. A fortress built on memories she could never share, on sacrifices that had no name, and on a brand of valor that was never meant for a display case. If you believe that true strength is often hidden in the quietest souls, and that the greatest heroes are the ones no one ever sees, then subscribe to our channel and follow this. Story 2, its heart-stopping conclusion. Weeks turned into a month, and the arrival of the new Academy Commandant. Colonel Miles Garrison sent a ripple of tension through the entire institution. Garrison was a legend, a man forged in the crucible of modern warfare, his reputation for discipline and perception preceding him. He was not a man impressed by shiny surfaces or inherited names. He was a man who saw the steel beneath. The cadets, especially Dalton's clique, straightened their ties and sharpened their salutes, eager to impress the new leadership. Helena, however, continued her silent routine, a constant, unchanging presence in the ever-shifting landscape of the academy. One afternoon, as she was tending to the rose bushes in the Commandant's private garden, a place of quiet solitude, Colonel Garrison stepped outside. He was on the phone, his voice a low, serious rumble. He didn't notice her at first. his gaze fixed on the distant hills. But as he finished his call, he turned and his eyes, sharp and analytical, fell upon her. He saw the way she moved, the economy of her motions as she pruned a dead branch. There was no wasted energy, no hesitation. It was a kind of physical grammar he recognized, the language of someone who had been trained to a point of absolute efficiency. I saw the calm in her posture, the way she stood, perfectly balanced, even while kneeling in the dirt. It was a stillness he hadn't seen in cadets who had been drilling for years. He walked over, his heavy boots silent on the soft grass. "You take great care of these roses," he said, his voice softer than the cadets were used to. Helena looked up, her expression unreadable. She simply nodded. "They need it, sir." He smiled faintly. "My father was a gardener. Used to say you can tell a person's character by how they handle living things." He paused, studying her more closely. "I'm Colonel Garrison." "Helena Kovac," she replied, her voice quiet but clear. The name meant nothing to him, yet he felt an inexplicable pull, a sense of dissonance. This woman did not fit her role. It was like seeing a master swordsman sweeping a floor. The tool was wrong for the hand holding it. Dalton and his friends, passing by on a nearby path, saw the interaction. They saw the esteemed new Commandant speaking to the old janitor. Dalton's lip curled in a sneer. "Look at that," he muttered to Pierce. "Garrison must be desperate for conversation, probably asking her for gardening tips." They laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it. Garrison's focus was a commodity, and seeing it spent on someone like Helena was, to them, a waste. It was an affront to the natural order of the Academy. That evening the announcement was made. The Academy would be hosting the Centennial Valor Gala, a formal affair to commemorate 100 years of history. The keynote speaker was to be a figure of almost mythical status, soldier known only by the calcined ghost, whose actions in a single classified operation in the Zarkon Valley had saved an entire battalion from annihilation. Among the saved was a young Captain Miles Garrison. The cadets buzzed with excitement. The legend of Ghost was Academy folklore, a story told in hushed, reverent tones. They all pictured a giant of a man, scarred and hardened by 100 battles. Dalton became obsessed, boasting to everyone that he would be the one to unmask the hero. His arrogance grew, fed by the anticipation. The night before the gala, as Helena was buffing the floor of Valor Hall one last time, Dalton's clique cornered her. The vast room was empty, lit only by a few security lights, casting long, distorted shadows. The air was thick with the smell of wax and suspense. "Big night tomorrow, Helena," Dalton said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "The real legends will be walking this floor. Make sure it shines for them. We wouldn't want a hero like Ghost to slip on a dull spot, would we?" He looked down at her on her hands and knees, a queen surveying a peasant. "You'll be here, won't you? Tucked away in a closet somewhere, listening to the speeches, wishing you'd done something with your life?" Helena said nothing. She simply looked at the distorted reflection of his face in the polished marble, a grotesque mask of youthful pride. She felt a deep, profound pity for him, for the hard lesson that was hurtling his way like a freight train in the dark. The Centennial Valor Gala was an ocean of dress blues and shimmering evening gowns. Valor Hall, which Helena had polished to a mirror-like sheen, was now alive with the clinking of glasses, the murmur of hundreds of conversations, and the palpable weight of legacy. High-ranking generals with chests full of ribbons mingled with influential politicians, their faces beaming under the crystal chandeliers. The cadets, including Dalton, stood in ramrod straight formations, their faces a mixture of awe and nervous energy. They were witnesses to the very pinnacle of the world they so desperately wanted to conquer. Dalton's eyes darted around the room, scanning every face, trying to guess which of the decorated older men might be the legendary Ghost. He imagined shaking the hero's hand, looking into the eyes of a true warrior. He felt he was on the precipice of his own destiny. Helena was not there, at least not the Helena they knew. She was, as Dalton had predicted, tucked away, but not in a janitor's closet. She was in a small, private antechamber off the main stage, a room reserved for honored guests. She was looking at her own reflection in a small mirror, but this time, the woman staring back was not a stranger. She wore a simple, sleeveless, floor-length dress of the deepest midnight blue. Her silver hair was not in a bun, but styled elegantly, framing a face that, without the fatigue of her daily labors, showed the fine, strong bones beneath. The lines of exhaustion were replaced by an aura of profound, unshakable calm. There was no jewelry, no makeup to speak of. Her dignity was her only adornment. There was a soft knock on the door. "It's almost time," Colonel Garrison's voice came from the other side. "Are you ready?" Helena took one last deep breath, the air filling her lungs like a familiar old friend. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. The master of ceremonies, a retired 4-star general, was concluding his introduction, a story that has become a part of this academy's soul. A story of impossible odds, of a single soldier who held back the tide. We have called this hero ghost for years to protect an identity shrouded in the highest levels of classification. Tonight, that ghost steps into the light. A hush fell over the crowd. The cadets leaned forward, their breath held in their chests. Dalton's heart was pounding. This was it. The moment of revelation. Colonel Miles Garrison strode to the podium, his presence commanding the absolute attention of everyone in the hall. His face was solemn, etched with a gravity that went beyond the formality of the event. "Valor," he began, his voice resonating. "With quiet power is not always loud. It is not always found in the heat of a charge or the roar of a battle cry. Sometimes the greatest valor is silent. It is the quiet endurance, the unseen sacrifice, the courage to do what is necessary, with no expectation of reward or recognition." He paused, his eyes sweeping over the sea of faces, finally landing on Dalton, holding his gaze for a beat too long. "I am here tonight. My men from the 3rd Battalion are alive today because of that silent valor. I was a captain then, young and arrogant, much like some of you. I thought I knew what a hero looked like. I was wrong." He turned from the podium, his gaze directed towards the wings of the stage. "It is my deepest, most profound honor to finally introduce the person who saved my life and the lives of every man under my command. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the soldier we have called Ghost." Every eye followed his gesture. A wave of confusion rippled through the hall. They expected a titan, expected a legend made flesh. Instead, into the brilliant glare of the stage lights, walked Helena Kovac. A collective, audible gasp swept through the room. It was a sound of 1,000 realities shattering at once. The cadets were frozen, their faces masks of utter disbelief. Dalton looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. His mouth hung slightly open, his mind struggling to reconcile the image of the old janitor with the figure of impossible grace now standing at the center of the stage. He saw her, but he didn't see her. This couldn't be happening. It was a prank, a mistake. But then Colonel Garrison did something that cemented the unbelievable truth. He walked over to Helena, holding a formal dark blue military dress jacket. It was unadorned, no flashy epaulets or stripes. But as he gently helped her put it on, the stage lights caught something on the high, stiff collar. It was a small pin. Intricately designed, a silver cross entwined with a shadowy winged figure. It was the Spectre's Cross, a classified emblem known to only a handful of people in the world. The symbol of the ultra-covert, off-the-books unit so secret, most of the military's top brass didn't even know it existed. To the cadets, it was nothing. To Colonel Garrison, and to a few old, battle-hardened generals in the front row, whose eyes were now wide with awe, it was the equivalent of seeing the Holy Grail. The camera of the live feed zoomed in, broadcasting the image of the pin on the giant screens. The blood drained from Dalton's face. The world tilted on its axis, his arrogance, his prejudice, his entire worldview crumbling into dust. The washed-up old woman he had mocked was not just a hero. She was a legend beyond his wildest comprehension. The silence in Valor Hall was absolute, a profound, stunned void that followed the thunderclap of revelation. It stretched for what felt like an eternity, thick with the weight of shattered perceptions. Dalton stood paralyzed, his mind a maelstrom. of his own cruel words, his taunts, his smug dismissal. Make sure the floor shines for them, a blank slate, wishing you'd done something with your life. Each memory was a shard of glass twisting in his gut. He stared at Helena, now bathed in the respectful glow of the stage lights, and for the first time he truly saw her, saw the quiet strength not as weakness, but as control. He saw the silence not as emptiness, but as the solemn peace of a person who had seen and done things he could only read about in classified files. He saw the lines on her face not as signs of age, but as a map of a life lived with more consequence than he could ever imagine. Colonel Garrison stepped back from Helena, a look of profound, almost reverential respect on his face. He nodded to her, a silent transfer of the stage. Helena walked to the podium. She didn't adjust the microphone. She didn't shuffle any notes. She simply placed her hands on the sides of the lectern and looked out at the silent, staring crowd. Her gaze was not accusatory or triumphant. It was calm, clear, and deeply human. "Good evening," she said. Voice was the same quiet voice from the hallways, but in the focused silence of the hall, it carried the weight of a decree. It was economical, yet every syllable landed with the force of a hammer blow. "The greatest honor," she began slowly, "is not to be remembered. It is to serve in such a way that those you protect can live in peace, free to forget. The names on the walls of this hall belong to heroes who made their sacrifice in the light. We must also honor the countless others who made theirs in the shadows, whose names will never be known, whose stories will never be told. Their courage is the foundation upon which this institution and our country is built. Thank you." Was all. There was no grand speech, no recounting of heroic deeds, no condemnation of those who had misjudged her. There was only a simple, profound truth, delivered with the quiet dignity that was her very essence. The silence held for one more heartbeat, and then a single person began to clap. It was an old, decorated general in the front row, his eyes wet with tears. Then another joined, and another. Within seconds, the entire hall erupted. It was not polite applause. It was a thunderous, rolling, unrestrained ovation, a wave of sound that seemed to shake the very marble of the walls. Every single person was on their feet, their faces turned to the woman on the stage. The cadets were the last to rise, as if jolted from a collective trance. Led by a pale, trembling Dalton, they rose to their feet and began to applaud. Their movements stiff with shame, but their sound desperate and fervent. It was an apology, a plea for forgiveness, recognition of their own monumental blindness, all expressed in the frantic clapping of their hands. The ovation went on for minutes, a sustained roar of respect and awe. Helena simply stood there, accepting it not with pride but with a serene grace. A quiet nod of acknowledgement for the nameless ghosts for whom she had spoken. Later, as the gala was winding down, Helena stood alone in the no-empty Commandant's garden, the same one where she had tended the roses. The cool night air was a relief. She heard footsteps on the grass behind her and turned. It was Dalton. His uniform seemed too big for him now, his usual arrogance replaced by a raw, painful humility. He couldn't meet her eyes. He just stared at the ground in front of her polished shoes. "Ma'am," he began, his voice cracking. I don't know what to say." He looked up, his eyes filled with a shame so deep it was agonizing to witness. "The things I said, the way I treated you, ... There is no excuse. I am so sorry." Helena looked at him, truly looked at him, and he saw no anger in her gaze. He saw no "I told you so." He saw only a vast, deep understanding, the kind of empathy that can only be earned through immense suffering. She gave him the smallest of nods, a gesture of forgiveness more powerful than any words could ever be. That single, silent gesture broke him. A tear traced a path down his cheek. He straightened up, wiped it away, and gave her the sharpest, most sincere salute he had ever rendered in his life. "Thank you, ma'am," he whispered, then turned and walked away, a changed man. Months later, a new group of first-year cadets were gathered in a lecture hall. Their instructor was not one of the usual tactical officers. Standing before them, dressed in a simple but professional instructor's uniform, was Helena Kovac. She was the Academy's newest and most revered professor of ethics and unconventional warfare. Her first lesson was already underway. She stood in silence, letting the cadets observe her, letting them form their own judgments, just as Dalton once had. Then she smiled faintly. "Your first lesson," she said, her voice filling the quiet room, "is that the enemy and the hero will rarely look the way you expect." The transformation was complete. The perception had been irrevocably altered. The quiet janitor had not only been vindicated, but she had become the living embodiment of the Academy's highest ideals. A lasting lesson that true worth is not in the glory you seek, but in the service you quietly give.